Today's guest is Chris Shurian. He built a $15 million construction company, starting with $5,000 borrowed from friends and family, raised $18 million for a luxury resort, launched multiple restaurant concepts across Utah, and now mentors the next generation of founders, all while finishing 2 Ironmans and raising 8.5 kids. But here's what separates him from other serial entrepreneurs. He doesn't chase shiny objects. He engineers experiences that strengthen families. Today, we're going to be talking about the frameworks behind his multi ventures, the psychology of loss as fuel, and how he was able to bootstrap one of these incredible companies. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Leo. I appreciate you having me.
So tell us, what's been the most significant lesson you've learned in this past year?
That's a great question, Leo. And unfortunately, this last year, it was a lesson that I had learned several times before. But occasionally we have really thick, stubborn heads and we forget lessons. So this last year, we were operating our restaurants and one of the restaurants was struggling mightily and ended up failing. I ended up having to close the restaurant because I put a little too much faith in my manager and I didn't check on the manager. We have KPIs in place. We have systems and processes to track how they're doing, and I just wasn't paying close enough attention to it. So by the time I really dug in and realized how much trouble we were in, it was too late, and I literally had to close down the restaurant. And man, it's embarrassing because that's a lesson I've learned over and over again, and I just let it sneak up on me, and I gave too much. Uh, you know, I just kind of sat back and got lazy and let a person run a restaurant who really shouldn't have been running a restaurant. And we had a huge failure. It was shocking for that to happen to me at this point in my life.
Yeah, and no nobody is invincible to the realities of life, right? I think it's we like to think after we've built a certain amount of success that like we're untouchable, but no, I think this is a healthy dose of reality.
You can never stop. Uh, you can never stop learning. I'm a big fan of learning all the time, but you also have to remember the basics, and you have to stick with the basics. And keep an eye on your people, keep an eye on the operations. Having good KPIs in place is is business 101. But even like you said, down the road, I've been doing this a long time, and I still just lost track of that, and it really bit me in the butt.
So, how do you track the KPIs and sort of what did you learn from this experience? Like how did it happen? How did you respond to it? And then what did you learn?
Yeah. So in our restaurants and in every business we've ever owned, I have a different KPI. So I have key performance indicators. I have a scoreboard that is handed to me once a week, and that scoreboard has on it, the vitals of the business. Where we're having success, and if we're struggling, it'll tell me where we're struggling. And I've created, and every business is different. So what I create for a restaurant would be different than what I create for the hotel or what I create for the construction company. These KPIs, these scoreboards are just different. And what happens is you have to rely on good information being entered into your scoreboard to make sure you have an accurate snapshot of your business. Well, what was happening is I felt like the information being entered into the scoreboard wasn't accurate, but I didn't question it. I just kind of went along with it because I was too busy. I had other things going on, but I still felt in my gut that something was off. And and like I said, when I finally dug into it and figured out that the manager who was supposed to be putting in the accurate information was actually putting in inaccurate information. So by the time I really dug into the financials and looked into the P&L and the expenses, and we were underwater. So the lesson I learned is, once again, follow your gut. If you don't think something's quite right, dig into it a little bit deeper and make sure you have good answers, because I really did feel like the numbers weren't right that I was seeing. And ultimately, when I got into it, they weren't right. And I trusted that person, that person who worked for me for a while, but there were signs, there were signs here and there that I was like, huh, hmm. And instead of just brushing them off because I was too busy, I should have dug in a little deeper.
Yeah.
So, the lesson I learned is I need to follow those gut feelings. I need to follow those signs, and don't be afraid to dig in and dig in a little quicker before it gets too late.
Yeah. I think complacency and trusting your gut are two very, very important lessons. And, with these core learnings, we have to learn it, we forget it, then we relearn it again. And the reality is that the success, it's not about learning the latest strategy. It's just relearning your fundamentals. So there's just a lot of reminding.
Yeah, yeah, and like you mentioned, no matter how far down the road you get, no matter how comfortable you are, and no matter how good you have things going, you still have to be vigilant, and you still have to just keep an eye on it and dig a little deeper every once in a while to make sure that it's being done right.
Yeah. So let's bring it back to kind of when you're younger, right? You started this construction company with what, $5,000 only? How did you do that? I mean, it was definitely a lot of grit, but walk us through that. What was the vision and how did you play it out?
Well, like every great entrepreneur, I had a job, and at a certain point, I felt like I could do it better on my own, right? So, there's a book that Michael Gerber wrote called The E Myth, and
Mm,
he calls it a entrepreneurial seizure, right? And we've all had them, right? We've all had them. And so that's exactly what happened to me. I was working for a construction company. I enjoyed it. I worked for a good company. I learned a lot. But at a certain point, I felt like I could do it on my own and do it better. And so, man, I just, in fact, I didn't even own a truck. Like I was working for a construction company and they provided a truck for me. So for me to start my own construction company, I had to go find a truck, and here's a good example of bootstrapping. My uncle had an old Ford truck sitting on his property that he used, and I used to help him as his nephew. I'd go do chores for him and use his old truck. And I said, "Hey, uncle, can I buy that truck from you?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Can I trade for it? Do you need some work done?" And so that's how I got my first work truck was I did trade for my uncle and got a work truck, right? And I still have that truck. I still own that truck, right? It's like this. I've owned it for 40 years, and it's like this cool reminder of how I got started and where I got started. And so, yeah, that's real bootstrapping. And then, when you're young and you're doing it, you don't have a lot of overhead. Your family responsibilities are low, so you can afford to squeak by for a little while. And then you start making money, and then whatever money you make, you put back into the business. And you need tools, you go buy a tool and you put it to work, and then you go buy another tool, you put it to work, and you just slowly build up from there. So that's where I started. I didn't have a truck. I didn't have a truck. I had nothing, and I just started and went to work and started building it.
So we all know sort of the start of any business. It's a lot of scrappiness. It's a lot of like to make something from nothing just takes an immense amount of willpower, of grit, perseverance, and all that. But so when you finally got that sort of momentum, right? When you have the sort of product market fit a little bit going, you have your clients going, like how did you grow the business? I mean, did you grow a team? Did you have structures in place? How did you grow the company from one from, let's say, from 1 to 5?
Yeah. So when I started that first construction company, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I didn't know what kind of construction, because when you say construction, there's a lot of different companies or industries that fall under the construction. So I didn't even know what I wanted to do. So I just would take whatever job I could get, and I'd go into a neighborhood and do a little project, and someone would see me working on a house and they'd say, "Hey, can you come help me out?" So I'd go over there and do that job, and I just would bounce back and forth. And sometimes people would ask me to do things that I didn't even know how to do. I had never done before. But, being a young, scrappy entrepreneur, I figured it out. And I would say, okay, yeah, I can do that. And I'd go ask somebody, how do you do that? And then I would go do it and get paid for it. So initially, I was just kind of floundering, didn't know what industry or what part of the construction I wanted to be in until there was one point where I did a really nice remodel job on a house, and I really enjoyed it. It was a pretty significant remodel, one of the biggest jobs I'd done, and at the time it was just me and one other person, and I really liked that, and I really thought, I could just focus on remodeling houses, and then I could put the word out that I'm just the remodel guy, and if I did a really good job, then I could grow it. And I remember making that decision that I was going to stick to remodeling and then I would go from there. And then things just fell into place. You do one project, you do another project, and then all of a sudden I needed to hire more people because I needed more help. And then, here's a quick story, but I was growing my company, and it was me and I had two other fellows that worked for me, and the three of us would pretty much do all the work. I mean, we were hands on. And we were hands on because nobody does it as good as I do, right? That's how our
Mhm.
mind thinks. And I remember I got hurt. I hurt my back and I threw my back out. I herniated a disc in my back, and it put me in bed for 2 weeks. And for 2 weeks, I literally had to rely on my 2 employees to do all the work. But when I came out after 2 weeks of being completely just incapacitated, where I could get up and move around, I realized that those 2 guys that I had working for me knew how to do the work, and they probably even did it better than I did. And so at that point, I got so busy because all of a sudden I'm like, well, I'm going to put Jason over here, I'm going to put Clark over here, and I'm going to go get more work. So that when Jason's done with this job, I have another one for him. When Clark's done with this one, so I kept growing it that way and hiring more people. And it was this realization that, there's a lot of great employees out there, a lot of great people that do great work. And if you just let them, I was forced to make them and let them do the work. But, because we hold on too tight. But there's a lot of great people out there, and all you gotta do is just let them do the work, teach them what you want done, and let them do it. And you'll be surprised at how things go from there. And then I was able to focus on what I was good at. I was good at selling the jobs. I was good at designing the jobs. I was good at getting the work for the next guy. And man, together we grew it. And within several years, I had 50 employees, and we were doing, we went from doing a couple $100,000 a year to $15 million a year. We'd expanded greatly, and we're having great success. And like I said, it really goes back to that moment where I threw my back out,
Hmm.
and I just had no choice but to let them do the work. And then we just took off from there.
Wow. Yeah. Sometimes it just, life forces your hand a little bit. And through these things, you realize that you're finally doing the thing that you said you would do at some point, but life forces your hand. I know people like that. So when it came to growing your company initially, I mean, as far as the employees, were your employees always employees? Like, how did they sort of handle like you growing the business, right? Because I mean, I think what people don't really talk about is the behind the scenes. It's like, hey, if it's a small team and you're starting off, and like, hey, here's the big boss, like, oh wow, the business is growing, but like I'm not growing so much, like there might be some resentment.
Yeah. That's always tricky, right? I mean, that's always tricky when the employees, some employees don't grow well with a growing business, right? Some people just want to stay small, and unfortunately, one of those fellas who was helped me get started and helped me grow got to a point where he just didn't like working in a bigger company, even though he had responsibility and he was being compensated very well. He just really liked. He wanted to go back to that small, one or two guy, and so he did. He left, started his own little company, and stayed small forever. So for me, once again, I just was I was growing and just trying to keep up. And so I was a learner. I was always learning. I was always reading books. I always had great mentors in my life. I had people I could look up to, and I could say, "Hey, how do I do this? How do I how do I scale this business?" And they taught me. I read that book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and he talked about how you have to have systems and processes in place so that people know what their jobs are, know what their responsibilities are. So I went to work building those job descriptions and organizational charts, so everyone knew what their job was. And then I would talk to a friend of mine who was doing very well, and I'd say, "Okay, well, what do I do next?" And they would say, "Well, okay, you need do you have these KPIs?" Like, I just told you about my KPIs. That came from a friend of mine who said, "Look," he called it the Tahiti Report. And I said, "Well, why do you call it the Tahiti Report?" He said, "Well, every Tuesday morning, this report lands on my desk, and I look at it, and that tells me if my business is winning or losing. And I can be in Tahiti, and if I get that report to me in Tahiti, it tells me if my business is winning or losing." So I call it the Tahiti Report. Right. So I went and figured out, okay, I'm going to go create my own Tahiti Report. And in construction, I figured out what are the metrics I have to be looking at in order to make sure that I'm winning. Right. And that's been something that stuck with me forever. So for me, scaling and growing really was all about learning. I had to learn because, I didn't go to school to learn these things. And sometimes school doesn't teach you all these things. And I
Right.
had to learn it from reading books, mentors, coaches, having people in my life who could say, "Okay, Chris, what's the next step? Well, this is what you need to do." Great. What's the next step? This is what you need to do. And and then I'll wrap up this comment real quick, but I remember my guys that worked for me, some of them really got into it. Some of them really thought, "This is cool and this is fun. Let's go." Like I said, the one guy didn't. He didn't like it. But the other fella, he grew with me, and we talked about it, and he knew what his job was, and he appreciated the fact that he had this opportunity to grow with me, and he knew how important he was to the company, and he knew how to train new hires, how to treat our customers, and how to treat the job site, and he was really a great fit. So together we did it, and I had a good time.
Interesting. So how did you kind of grow the company? So let's say you have, the initial three people, you're like growing, you're like going to like five people, 10 people, then I mean you're obviously like wanting to increase their compensation. Like is there a rhyme or reason to like how you were kind of structuring or thinking through that?
I think I really did fumble through it. We didn't have a real good structure as far as, okay, every 6 months or every 90 days, we're going to do a review and we'll talk about rate. We didn't have that because as a young entrepreneur, you don't know these things yet. So it takes you a while to get there. So we really just kind of fumbled through it. And I knew I had an idea of what guys were getting paid in the industry. And so I always made sure to make sure my team was paid probably a little bit better than everyone else because I wanted my guys to know how important they were. And so I compensated them well. I provided opportunity. I provided lots of every winter we'd have a party, a company party. Every summer we'd have a company party where they'd bring their families. Families were really important to me, especially of the people that worked for me. So I wish I had a really good answer to say, this is how I did it. But in the beginning, you just kind of fumble around and figure it out. And then as you grow and learn more, then you get into more of a rhythm like, okay, let's do a review. Let's talk about compensation. Let's offer some benefits. Let's do these things so like I said, by the time you get to where there's 50 people working for you and, you're doing $15 million, we have a home building division, we have a remodel division, we have a custom cabinet shop, we have all these things. That's when we became a little more sophisticated. We hired professional, HR teams, we hired professional payroll companies. I had professional, CPAs and accountants working for me. So I really relied on bringing other people into the business that had that expertise to help me scale the business. And there's lots of people out there like that.
Mm, definitely. I think paying kind of biting the bullet and paying the right rate for competent people is what really separates a normal business from a great business. And keep in mind the average business is breaking even.
If you're lucky, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So very interesting. So as far as the Tahiti report, how do you figure out what kind of KPIs is important? I mean, you've done construction, you've done restaurants, like many different things. How do you sort of get to the heart of what's important to track?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I'm a learner. I'm a studier. I'm always out there trying to learn what's new and what's going on. And for example, when I started in the restaurant business, we just kind of fell into it. We built a big resort project and we had a restaurant space, and I wanted something really cool in our restaurant space, and I couldn't find anyone to do what I wanted, so I did it myself. I hired some guys that knew about restaurants. We built out this really cool restaurant. Well, knowing that I had to create a Tahiti report I studied, I actually contacted other restaurant owners. I went online and did some research and determined what were the important key metrics to tell me if the restaurant's doing well or not. So for example, I tracked what our daily sales were. I didn't break it down. I could break it down into dinner time, lunchtime, breakfast time, but I really just needed to know what my daily sales were. I need to know what my daily labor costs were because labor is a very important part of a restaurant. It can eat you up so quick. Also, food costs. I need to know what our food costs were on a regular basis. Um, the other things I looked at were, you know, what I'd call turn time. So from the time the person comes in the restaurant to the time they actually have gotten their food and they've paid and left, we'd look at that. Because if you have a lunch hour, people don't have a lot of time to eat for lunch. So you have to make sure that you're in and out in like 30 minutes. So that way they have time to get there, they have time to enjoy their meal, and they have time to get out of there. So my Tahiti report for the restaurant were those key metrics that I knew in our restaurant I had to keep an eye on. So for me, every week I would get this report and it would show me my weekly sales, my weekly labor, my weekly food costs, my average table turn, and all the and those basic data like that, so that I could see, okay, yeah, we're winning. If my revenue's off, then I know, well, that's not enough revenue to keep my restaurant open. So, I would look into why. If my labor's high, I could say why and ask questions. If my food costs are high, I could ask those questions. And so I think every industry has metrics like that
Mm,
apply that could help you understand whether you're winning or losing. And you need to find what those metrics are and then put them into a Tahiti report. But I know people, business owners that have made reports too complicated and they put way too much data and way too much information in it. And it's hard if it's not hard, if it's not going to be easy to look at, and it's not going to get used. Right.
mm,
So my opinion was keep it simple, keep it high level. And then if there's something that's off, then you can dig deeper. Right. That's
mm,
why I liked graphs. I like graphs and pie charts. And if something's off, like in my TD report, if something came in red, it was missing the mark. And then I could dig in and ask questions and then and get to the bottom of, okay, why is that? Why is labor high? And my manager might say, well, we just hired 2 new people and we had to train them. Okay. That makes sense. I get that. Right. Why are
mm,
food costs high? Well, I got a really good deal on this food product, so I bought extra and it'll spread out over the next 4 weeks. Okay, awesome. Those are good answers. But I wouldn't have known to ask those questions if I hadn't seen that something was off.
right. So when it comes to you kind of learning as you go, you mentioned that you're a big learner, and as with most as entrepreneurs, like you have to almost rise to the occasion, right? You're doing something that you've never done before, and these are not things that you can learn in the classroom. Some lessons have to be learned, others could be taught. So, how did you kind of learn to upskill yourself in new things like are right in like financial analysis? Like, do you have sources of info? Was it mentors, or is it various sources that were super impactful to you?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned before that I'm a big fan of mentors. I've had a lot of great mentors in my life. I've even reached out to people in my industry that I looked up to that I felt like ran a very successful business. And I've approached them and said, hey, and they know who I am. And I could say, hey, can I buy you lunch? I've got some questions because, we're growing and you're doing things right. Can you give me some advice? And you'd be surprised at how many of them were willing to open up and say, yeah, this is what I did. And this is what worked for me. People that are successful, I've found, have a very abundant mindset. They're not worried about me being competition, but they're happy to help me become better, right? And a lot of times, like, this is how I feel. If my competitor comes in and wants to learn and grow and get better, that's just better for the industry as a whole, right? So I think mentors are a huge underserved asset, and people would be surprised. Like I said, if you go to a mentor who's in your industry, don't be afraid to go and sit down and talk to them and ask them what they did and how they're doing it. So that was an important part of it. And then the other part is experts, right, Leo? I mean, there's fractional CFOs, there's fractional CMOs, there's fractional COOs, there's fractional legal teams. I mean, you don't have to hire, if your company cannot support a $150,000, controller or CFO, go get a fractional CFO and you get them for 1 day a week and they can do all the work that you need. And they have the expertise to help you out. So, don't be afraid to go seek out a professional who's really good at what they do and hire them to help you because especially when it comes to like the finances, if you don't have a good handle on your P&L, that could knock you out
Mm,
quicker than you can imagine, right? So you got to have accurate books. You have to have a good bookkeeper who's keeping track of everything. You need to have a good controller, a good CFO who's helping you understand what the numbers mean. When you want to make a big decision on doing something different or doing something new, when you're big enough, it makes sense to have somebody to help you analyze it. And I found that, it's good to have somebody, I'm a CEO, I'm a visionary. So, for me, it's like, let's go. My CFO was always like the opposite of me. He was conservative. He was looking at the bottom line. He was looking at the dollars. And so even though sometimes we would disagree on the direction, um, sometimes he won, sometimes I won, but I needed to have that counterbalance
mm,
to push me to success. Right. And I was fortunate enough to have some good guys like that in my life who knew that side of the business much better than I did and who could help me make good decisions.
Yeah, I think having that constructive disagreement is so important. If you have a team of yes men, then you have so many blind spots in your business. You don't know what's going on.
That's
And
right.
in business, there's a million and one things that can ruin you at any given time, right? Because I mean, so COVID, who would have thought that would happen?
Yeah.
We were just talking about it. So yeah, it's very important to have the experts at your fingertips, right? You have the fractional folks, mentors, and good staff. I think it's super important. So, kind of with that being said, too, how did you come about? So, like, okay, now you've built up your construction business. What was the inspiration of you sort of venturing off into let's say the restaurant business?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, so every business and every industry I was involved in, every company I built had an emphasis on customer service. I was always interested in making sure that I could provide some customer experience that set me apart from my competitors. So, for example, in construction, construction has a reputation of being flaky, shady, not very trustworthy, never show up on time, make a mess. So in my construction company, we showed up on time. We cleaned up after ourselves every day. We were very honest. We provide a very tight budget. Provide a very tight schedule. We provide a very professional experience to our customers because we want our customers to have that great experience. So that's just a precursor to when we decided that we needed a restaurant in a building that we had built, and we couldn't find a really good restaurateur that would put a restaurant in there that would provide that experience, because this was part of a bigger project where, big resort project where we were making sure that anyone that stepped foot on our resort had this great experience. And so if the restaurant wasn't right, it would ruin it for everybody. So when we designed the restaurant space, knowing that I wanted to make sure that we had this customer experience, then we built everything focused on making sure that when people came into our restaurant, they loved it. They were in awe, right? And and so I took that with me. Whatever business, whatever company I was in, I said, what can we do different that sets us apart from our competition so that our customers are like, that was awesome. I want to go back. And so that's how we did it. That's how we did it. And if an opportunity came along that I could get involved in a different industry or a different business, and I could say, okay, can I do something here that's different or better than the next guy? Then that was my approach. It's kind of like Disneyland, Leo. You've been to Disneyland or Disney World, or yeah, I mean, going to Disneyland versus going to some other, theme park, it's a whole different experience.
Mm,
And, I studied Walt Disney. I read his books. I understood how he did what he did. And Walt Disney also had this passion for creating this experience that was unique. So, learning about how he did it just resonated with me. And so my team is always sick and tired of me talking about Walt Disney, right? That's all I ever talk about. Like, I'm like, look, we're the Walt Disney of restaurants. We're the Walt Disney of construction. We're doing things different. And
mm.
because I just saw how he did it and I wanted to be more like him.
Yeah. As far as experience goes, it's really the X factor that drives one restaurant from everyone else. But more importantly, just you see it over and over. I mean, human psychology, we're all wired the same way. Now and 50, 100 years ago, we're all the same people, right? And right now, experience to us, it's what makes you feel special. And when you make someone feel special and that they can't get it anywhere else, they see innate value in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if my mission is, you know, to make families happy and make families stronger and provide lifelong memories, well, we can do that in just about any industry, right? I mean, if I'm going to go remodel your house and you walk away with this beautiful house and this beautiful experience, I've made your life better, right? I eliminated that stress that some contractors cause. If you can come into my restaurant and your kids think it's cool, you think it's cool, you have a great meal, you enjoyed it, your server was great, and you walk out of there thinking, okay, that was cool. My life's a little bit better for having been there. That was always our objective.
Yeah, and just switching gears a bit. So you're obviously a person that's done a lot, and not to mention you've done two Ironmans. I mean, how do you sort of find or prioritize what to focus your energy and focus on, because that is the most scarce resource we have, right? As entrepreneurs, even more scarce than time, because energy and focus, like certain days you just don't have it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I learned years and years ago, I read a book about, the American dream. You work, 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 and then you retire and enjoy life. Right. And then this author was also pointing out that there's a fallacy to that idea, because what if you don't survive until you retire? What if your family's gone? There's a lot of reasons why that's just not a great approach to life. And so I took it upon myself early on to build my business around my life. Like I work to live. I don't live to work. Does that make sense? Right. And so I always made it a priority to take time with my family, to take time for myself. I always made it a priority to not be a slave to my work. And if you establish that early on in a business, the business will work around that. There's too many people that let the business get away from them. They're a slave to their business. And then for them to try and back off and scale back, it's really, really hard, because the business doesn't know what to do without you there 24 hours a day. But I built it from the beginning with that mindset. And so it works. You can do that. And so I always prioritize that time. So when I decided and started rolling into this Ironman thing, that's a pretty hefty commitment. That's 10 to 15 hours a week of training. And that's a lot of time. But once again, I would get up early in the morning. I would go do a little workout, which was really good for me. This was happening during the recession of 08, 09, when my businesses were getting beat up pretty bad. That recession really hurt my business. And so for me to get up in the morning and do a pretty strenuous workout, or go run, or do something I've never done before, that was like I was having these little victories. Every day I could wake up and have a win, because then when I get to the office, I'm just going to get pounded, right? And so, basically, because I was able to build my life where my life was a priority, not the business, it gave me time to do that. And it actually, I'll have to say, is as much energy as I put into the Ironman training, it didn't take away. It actually gave me more energy to conquer the stuff I had to go conquer when I got to the office. And so for me, doing Ironman was a couple things. One, I wouldn't have survived the recession without Ironman training. I believe that 100%, right? My mindset, I came out of Ironman stronger mentally. I already had this can-do attitude, but it was even stronger, right? So I believe that I can do anything I put my mind to. I do. I mean, if I can go do an Ironman, I mean, I'm a big guy. Like, we're sitting here on video, but I'm a big guy. I'm heavy. I've never was built like a runner, but man, I was out there doing an Ironman, and I was actually doing pretty good at it. And I'm running marathons, and I'm actually running pretty fast. And all of a sudden my mind is like, yeah, I can do this, right? I can do it. So that was a huge, huge part of who I was. It helped me get through these really tough times, and I'm glad I did it. But it goes back to, I work to live. I don't live to work.
Yeah, I love that. I think if you're if you're respectful of your own boundaries, others will respect you even more. And not only is it your physical self, it's your business too. And people sort of learn to work around it. So I want to touch on the role of mentorship as well. I know you spoke a lot about this earlier on, that, I mean, we all need good people around us to give us good advice and guidance, because, I mean, we're all going through life the first time, right? Ideally, we shortcut it by learning from someone who's been there, done that. So how do people like find good mentors, and also what do, especially the younger entrepreneurs, call it like, in their 30s, like they're going from like, 1 to 5 instead of 0 to 1. Like, what did they get wrong?
Yeah. So I believe that no matter where you are on your scale of business, right? That you got the startups, the guys that are, they've got a few employees, are trying to figure it out. I believe that you still need to surround yourself with, or have some people in your life that you can talk to about the hard stuff. Like, for example, one of our offerings to our entrepreneurs is what we call Founders Exchange. And Founders Exchange is a mastermind group a very disciplined mastermind group where owners of businesses can get together once a month and they can share some of the wins they're having and also share some of the difficulties they're having, stuff that they can't share with anyone else. You've heard the saying, it's lonely at the top, right? Well, when you're at the top, who do you talk to about hard stuff? You don't want to talk to your employees about it because, you don't want them to worry about it. Sometimes you can't talk to your investors about it because you don't want your investors to worry about what the hard stuff is. And sometimes you don't want to take it home and talk to your partner about it. So we provide these mastermind groups where people can come in and talk about that hard stuff. And so no matter where you are in your business life, whether you're starting up, right in the middle of it, or even winding down, I really think it's important to have that place. Now that could come in form of mentors, that can come in the form of these mastermind groups, but I don't think anyone is too good to need that place. Now, as far as finding mentors, I'll tell you, when I first started off in my business, I would go knock on doors. If I met a guy who was a builder that was really successful and doing really good, I'd ask him if he'd go to have lunch with me, and we'd sit down and talk, and I'd pick his brain and learn everything I could, and take a bunch of notes, and then go apply it. So yeah, you just go out and find them. I don't think it's that difficult.
Absolutely. So just final few questions. Let's do them rapid fire, kind of just throw out whatever comes to mind. What's what's been the most expensive mistake that you've made, or the most expensive lesson that you've learned?
Oh, that's a painful one. I I built a big project. I was the owner of a very big development project, and I hired the wrong contractor. I hired a contractor that didn't have experience, and that decision, I knew he wasn't the right guy, but I liked him. We were friends, and that experience, that little lesson cost me, I'll bet 12 million.
Sheesh.
And I hired this guy to build he just wasn't qualified. I knew in my gut he wasn't good enough to do what I needed done. And then coming from a construction background, how embarrassing is that I hired a bad contractor to build something for me? Now, I am a hard customer. I would not want to build something for me because I know a lot about it. So yeah, I went against my gut, made a bad decision, thought I could push myself through it, thought I could fix it, and it hurt.
Okay, what's one belief that you had when you're in your 30s that you had a 180 on?
Man, that's a good question, Leo. Okay. In my leadership style, I think when I was younger, I used to push, push, push. I was a little bit more of a more of an aggressive leader type. I would hold people more accountable. I was a little rough. And then probably in my late 30s, I did this shift where my opinion or my belief of what a good leader is or what a great leader is shifted tremendously. And I shifted gears big time. So my leadership style shifted a complete 180 about halfway through my business career. And now I tend to lead with a little more patience. I tend to lead with a little more, I try to catch people doing things right instead of catching them doing things wrong. I try to, if I have someone performing here and I want them to perform up here, well, I treat them like they're performing up here and they rise to the occasion. In the old days, if I have someone here and I want them there, then I'm like pushing them there. And it's a different mindset. It's a different way of leading people. And that was probably my biggest paradigm shift, uh, midway through my career.
Okay. And final question is, what matters to you most now? What are you optimizing for in life?
As I mentioned, I've always liked helping people, helping other people, making people feel good about themselves, the customer service experience. And so now I have an opportunity now where I can really spend most of my time doing that. I can work with other entrepreneurs in my coaching, in the founders exchange. I really enjoy doing that. I really fortunate that I've had all these experiences. I've got all these battle scars that I call lessons learned that I can use to help other people have success. And, it might be a shortcut, could be a shortcut that they're learning from me. But I had one of my mentors told me one time, a wise man learns from his own experiences, but a super wise man learns from the experiences of others, right? So if I can share my experiences with others and they can learn from it and I can accelerate their success, then that to me is a win, right? And I really enjoy that. So I enjoy what I'm doing now. I don't have any employees, which is really great. It's
Yeah.
really great, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't miss that one bit. As much as I love people, there was a lot of stress that revolves around that. I'm no longer in the restaurant business. I was able to have a little exit and come away with that last little restaurant with some cash, which was kind of cool and a little success story. And now I can just focus on this, and I enjoy it. I
That's amazing. So how can people get in touch with you? Who are you looking to meet? How can we help you?
Yeah. So my website, bootstrapsandbattlescars.com, I just before I came into this meeting, I looked at the beta site. It's just about ready to release. But the whole focus is, I'm accessible. You can contact me directly. I'd love to hear from you. If you need a little bit of a, insight or some coaching or some whatever, just reach out to me. I'm happy to share whatever I can. I have a podcast I'm doing. I'm just getting started. I love the podcast. It's enjoyable. You can listen to the podcast and maybe you learn something there from my interviewing other entrepreneurs. And then, I'm working on a book. I've got a couple books I'm working on. So if you come to bootstrapsandbattlescars.com, give me your information, reach out to me on LinkedIn, whatever. I'm happy to talk, help, share whatever I can share. And then, I can make my book available. It's my first book is like, I don't have a real name for it yet, but it's Business Basics 101. I mean, it's like the basic things you need to know when you start your business, like just at a third grade level, let's talk about those things, right? And then we can work our way up from there. But but yeah, that's what we're doing. So I'd love to share that stuff.
Excellent. And thank you for your wisdom, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Leo, I appreciate you having me. You threw some good questions at me, some curveballs actually. I'm gonna have to
I'm glad.
write those down and be prepared for those next time.
I'm glad.